territories of the United States.
Territories of the United States are a type of political division that is directly overseen by the United States federal government, in contrast to the states, which share sovereignty with the federal government. The territories were created to govern newly acquired land while the borders of the United States were still evolving. Many of the boundaries of territories changed over time, when territories were subdivided or shifted, as when a portion of a territory was admitted as a state. Territories can be classified by whether they are incorporated and whether they have an organized government. Many organized incorporated territories of the United States existed from 1789 to 1959, the first being the Northwest and the Southwest Territory, the last being the Alaska Territory and the Hawaii Territory, through which 31 territories applied for and achieved statehood. In the process of organizing and promoting territories to statehood, some areas of a territory demographically lacking sufficient development and population densities were temporarily orphaned from parts of a larger territory at the time a vote was taken petitioning Congress for statehood rights. For example, when a portion of the Missouri Territory became the state of Missouri, the remaining portion of the territory, consisting of the present states of Iowa, Nebraska and the Dakotas, most of Kansas, Wyoming, and Montana, and parts of Colorado and Minnesota, effectively became an unorganized territory. The U.S. had no unincorporated territories, also called overseas possessions, or insular areas until 1856 but continues to control several of them today.
21st century territories.
Territories have always been a part of the United States. By act of Congress, the term United States, when used in a geographical sense, means the continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands of the United States. Since political union with the Northern Mariana Islands in 1986, they too are treated as a part of the U.S. An executive order in 2007 includes American Samoa as U.S. geographical extent duly reflected in U.S. State Department documents. The 5 inhabited U.S. territories have local voting rights, have protections under U.S. courts, pay some U.S. taxes, and are represented in the U.S. Congress by delegates who can appoint constituents to the Army, Navy, Air Force and Merchant Marine academies. Approximately 4 million islanders are U.S. citizens. About 55,000 U.S. non-citizen nationals live in Samoa. Under current law among the territories, only persons born in American Samoa and Swains Island are non-citizen U.S. nationals. Samoans are under the protection of the U.S., with freedom of U.S. travel without visas, and U.S. citizens do not lose citizenship by permanent residence there. Inhabited United States territories have democratic self-government, in local 3-branch governments, found respectively in Pago Pago, American Samoa; Hagåtña, Territory of Guam; Saipan, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands; San Juan, Commonwealth of Puerto Rico; Charlotte Amalie, United States Virgin Islands. 9 uninhabited territories administered by the Interior Department are Baker Island, Howland Island, Jarvis Island, Johnston Atoll, Kingman Reef, Midway Atoll, Navasso Island, Palmyra Atoll, and Wake Island. Every 2 years, U.S. citizens of the inhabited territories popularly elect members of Congress, titled congressman or congresswoman. They possess the same powers as other members of the House, except that they may not vote when the House is meeting as the House of Representatives. They participate in debate, are assigned offices, money for staff, and appoint constituents from their territories to the 4 military academies: Army, Navy, Air Force and Merchant Marine Academy. Like the delegate from District of Columbia, they do not vote in a roll call vote, but they vote on all legislation before Congress as equals in their standing committees. They are included in their party count for each committee, and they are equal to senators on conference committees. Depending on the Congress, they may also vote on the floor in the House Committee of the Whole. Members of Congress from the territories seated as of January 2013 are, Gregorio Sablan for the Northern Marianas, Madeline Bordalo for Guam, Ene Faliame Vallega for Samoa, Pedro Pierluisi for Puerto Rico, and Donna Christian Christensen for the Virgin Islands.
Incorporated and unincorporated territories.
An incorporated territory of the United States is a specific area under the jurisdiction of the United States, over which the United States Congress has determined that the United States Constitution is to be applied to the territory's local government and inhabitants in its entirety, for example, citizenship, trial by jury, in the same manner as it applies to the local governments and residents of the U.S. states. Incorporated territories are considered an integral part of the United States, as opposed to being merely possessions. All territory under the control of the federal government is considered part of the United States for purposes of law. From 1901 to 1905, the U.S. Supreme Court in a series of opinions known as the Insular Cases held that the Constitution extended ex proprio vigor, by its own force, to the territories. However, the court in these cases also established the doctrine of territorial incorporation, under which the Constitution applies fully only in incorporated territories such as Alaska and Hawaii, and applies only partially in the new unincorporated territories of Puerto Rico, Guam and the Philippines. To define what is an unincorporated territory in Balzac v. People of Puerto Rico, 258 U.S. 298, 312, 1922, the court used, as an argument of non-incorporated territory, the following statements regarding the court in Puerto Rico. In Glidden Company v. ZDANOK, 370 U.S. 530, 1962, the court cited Balzac and made the following statement regarding courts in unincorporated territories. The U.S. Supreme Court offers two ways in which incorporation could be made. Incorporation is not to be assumed without express declaration, or an implication so strong as to exclude any other view. In Downs v. Bidwell, 182 U.S. 244, 319, 1901, the court also said,
Express or implied?
in Balzac, where Chief Justice Taft delivered the opinion of the court, the meaning of implied was specified.
Incorporated territories U.S. Supreme Court declarations.
In Rasmussen v. U.S., 197 U.S. 516, 1905, quoting from Article 3 of the 1867 Treaty for the Purchase of Alaska, the Supreme Court said, the inhabitants of the ceded territory shall be admitted to the enjoyment of all the rights, advantages, and immunities of citizens of the United States. This declaration, although somewhat changed in phraseology, is the equivalent, as pointed out in Downs v. Bidwell, of the formula, employed from the beginning to express the purpose to incorporate acquired territory into the United States, especially in the absence of other provisions showing an intention to the contrary. Here we see that the act of incorporation is on the people of the territory, not on the territory per se, by extending the privileges and immunities clause of the Constitution to them. The U.S. Supreme Court statements follow.
Alaska Territory.
Congress express declaration. Rasmussen v. The United States, 197 U.S. 516, 522, 1905 arose out of a misdemeanor conviction in Alaska by a jury composed of 6 persons pursuant to a federal statute allowing such a procedure in Alaska. In a decision written by Justice White, a majority of the court concluded that Alaska had been incorporated into the United States because the Treaty of Cession with Russia specifically declared that the inhabitants of the ceded territory shall be admitted to the enjoyment of all the rights, advantages and immunities of citizens of the United States. In addition, there was congressional implication so strong as to exclude any other view. Justice Brown, in his concurring opinion, also expressed the same thought.
Florida Territory.
Indore v. USA, 195 U.S. 138, 141-142, 1904 Justice Marshall is quoted more extensively as follows. In Downs v. Bidwell, 182 U.S. 244, 256, 1901, Justice Brown says,
Southwest Territory.
In Downs v. Bidwell Supra at 321 to 322, the first mention of incorporation is made in the following paragraph by Justice Brown.
Louisiana Territory.
In Downs v. Bidwell Supra at 252, it was said, "The Supreme Court of the United States is unanimous in its interpretation that the extension of the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the Constitution of the United States to the inhabitants of a territory in effect produces the incorporation of that territory. The net effect of incorporation is that the territory becomes an integral part of the geographical boundaries of the United States and cannot, from then on, be separated. Indeed, the whole body of the U.S. Constitution is extended to the inhabitants of that territory, except for those provisions that relate to its federal character. More so, the needful rules and regulations of the territorial clause must yield to the Constitution and the inherent constraints imposed on it in dealing with the privileges and immunities of the inhabitants of the incorporated territory. Notice must be taken that incorporation of a territory takes place through the incorporation of its inhabitants, not of the territory per se. As such, those inhabitants receive the full impact of the U.S. Constitution, except for those provisions that deal specifically with the federal character of the Union. In the contemporary sense, the term unincorporated territory refers primarily to insular areas. There is currently only one incorporated territory, Palmyra Atoll, which is not an organized territory. Conversely, a territory can be organized without being an incorporated territory, a contemporary example being Puerto Rico. See Organized Incorporated Territories of the United States and Unincorporated Territories of the United States for timelines.
Organized Territory.
Lands under the sovereignty of the federal government, but not part of any state, that were given a measure of self-rule by the Congress through an organic act subject to the Congress plenary powers under the Territorial Clause of Article 4, Sec. 3, of the U.S. Constitution.
Classification of current U.S. territories. Incorporated organized territories.
No incorporated organized territories have existed since 1959, the last two being Territory of Hawaii and Territory of Alaska, both of which achieved statehood in that year.
Incorporated unorganized territories.
Palmyra Atoll is, as of 2007, partly privately owned by the Nature Conservancy with much of the rest owned by the federal government and managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It is administered by the U.S. Department of the Interior. It is an archipelago of about 50 small islands with about 1.56 square miles, 4 kilometers 2, of land area, lying about 1,000 miles, 1,609 kilometers, south of Oahu, Hawaii. The atoll was acquired by the United States through the annexation of the Republic of Hawaii in 1898. When the Territory of Hawaii was incorporated on April 30, 1900, Palmyra Atoll was incorporated as part of that territory. However, when the state of Hawaii was admitted to the Union in 1959, the Act of Congress explicitly separated Palmyra Atoll from the newly federated state. Palmyra remained an incorporated territory, but received no new organized government. There are also territories that have the status of being incorporated but that are not organized. U.S. coastal waters out to 12 nautical miles offshore, except state waters extend a minimum of 3 nautical miles offshore, U.S. flagged vessels at sea, naval, Coast Guard, or civilian.
Extraterritorial jurisdiction.
The United States exercises some degree of extraterritorial jurisdiction in overseas areas such as U.S. embassies, Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, since 1903, a 45 square miles, 117 kilometers 2, area of land along Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to which the United States claims to hold a perpetual lease. This Cuban government does not recognize America's claim, and has refused to accept any payment since 1959. The actual lease amount is just $2,000 in gold per year, equivalent in value in 2004 to approximately $4,000. Certain other parcels in foreign countries held by lease, such as military bases, depending on the terms of a lease, treaty, or status of forces agreement with the host country.
Classification of former U.S. territories and administered areas. Former incorporated organized territories of the United States.
See Organized Incorporated Territories of the United States for a complete list.
Former unincorporated territories of the United States incomplete.
The Corn Islands, 1914 to 1971, leased for 99 years under the Bryan-Chamorro Treaty, but returned to Nicaragua upon the abrogation of the treaty in 1970. The Line Islands. 1979, disputed claim with the United Kingdom. U.S. claim ceded to Kiribati upon its independence in 1979. The Panama Canal Zone, 1903 to 1979, sovereignty returned to Panama under the Torrijos-Carter Treaties of 1978. The U.S. retained a military base there and control of the canal until December 31, 1999. The Philippine Islands, 1898 to 1935. The Commonwealth of the Philippines, 1935-46, granted full independence on July 4, 1946. Phoenix Islands. -1979, disputed claim with the United Kingdom. U.S. claim ceded to Kiribati upon its independence in 1979. Puerto Sueno Bank, 1869-1981, claimed under Guano Islands Act. Claim abandoned on September 7, 1981, by treaty. Roncador Bank, 1856-1981, claimed under Guano Islands Act, ceded to Colombia on September 7, 1981, by treaty. Serrana Bank. -1981, claimed under Guano Islands Act, ceded to Colombia on September 7, 1981, by treaty. Swan Islands, 1863-1972, claimed under Guano Islands Act, ceded to Honduras in 1972, by treaty.
Former unincorporated territories of the United States under military government.
Puerto Rico, April 11, 1899, May 1, 1900, civil government operations began. Philippines, August 14, 1898, July 4, 1901, civil government operations began. Guam, April 11, 1899, July 1, 1950, civil government operations began.
Areas formerly administered by the United States.
Cuba, April 11, 1899, May 20, 1902, sovereignty recognized as Republic of Cuba. Philippines, August 14, 1898, July 4, 1946, sovereignty recognized as Republic of the Philippines. Veracruz was occupied by the United States for 6 months, from April 21, 1914 to November 23, 1914, consequential to the Tampico Affair. Haiti was occupied by the United States from 1915 to 1934. Dominican Republic was occupied by United States from 1916 to 1924 and again from 1965 to 1966. Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, 1947 to 1986, included the Compact of Free Association Nations, Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Ryukyu Islands including Okinawa, 1952 to 1972, returned to Japanese control, included some other minor islands under the agreement between the United States of America and Japan concerning the Ryukyu Islands and the Doito Islands. Nanpo Islands, 1945 to 1968, returned to Japanese control by mutual agreement. Marcus Island, or Minamaterishima, 1945 to 1968, returned to Japanese control by mutual agreement. Falkland Islands, 1831 to 1832.
Other zones.
United States occupation of Greenland, 1941 to 1945. United States occupation of Iceland during World War II, 1941 to 1946. American occupation zones in Allied-occupied Austria and Vienna, 1945 to 1955. American occupation zone in West Berlin, 1945 to 1990. American occupation zones of the Allied occupation zones in Germany, 1945 to 1949. Allied military government for occupied territories in full force in Allied-controlled sections of Italy from invasion of Sicily in July 1943 until the armistice with Italy in September 1943. AMGOT continued in newly liberated areas of Italy until the end of World War II. Also existed in combat zones of Allied nations such as France, Free Territory of Trieste, 1947–1954, US co-administered a portion of the Free Territory along with the UK, occupation of Japan, 1945–1952, US participation in the occupation of the Rhineland, Germany, 1918–1921, South Korea, U.S. occupation of the south of the 38th parallel north in Korea in 1945–1948. The region is slightly different from the current practical boundary of the Republic of Korea, South Korea, since the ceasefire of the Korean War. See also Division of Korea, Coalition Provisional Authority Iraq, 2003–2004, Green Zone Iraq, March 20, 2003, December 31, 2008, Clipperton Island, 1944–1945, occupied territory. Returned to France on October 23, 1945, Grenada invasion and occupation, 1983.
Territories on stamps.
The United States first gained territory recognized by the European powers by treaties with the English in the Treaty of Paris, 1783, with the French in the Louisiana Purchase, and with the Spanish in the Adams-Onis Treaty. From the English came territory west to the Mississippi River, divided under the Articles of Confederation into the Northwest Territory, Northwest Ordinance, and the Southwest Territory, later Mississippi Territory. The next expansions in territory came about by purchases from France and Spain. From the French came Louisiana Territory west to the Rocky Mountains and the north shaped as a funnel originating in Louisiana. The commemorative stamp issued April 30, 1904. The 1-cent stamp features the map of the Louisiana Transfer superimposed on a political map of the contiguous 48 states. From the Spanish came Florida Territory. Florida statehood was commemorated on its 100th anniversary by a 3-cent stamp on March 3, 1945. The original state seal includes an outline map of the Florida Peninsula. The gates of St. Augustine are pictured on the left and the state capital in Tallahassee on the right. Westward migration of Americans into the Mexican province of Coahuila-White Edges led to conflicts with the central government, resulting in a Declaration of Independence in 1836 and a Republic of Texas. Texas is admitted as a state under President James K. Polk in 1845. The final steps of the United States Manifest destiny to acquire territory from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean was secured by war, negotiation and purchase. When Mexico moved to secure its territorial claims against Texas, the Mexican-American War ensued under President Polk. The Kearny expedition organized American territorial government in New Mexico and California in the region which would become the Mexican Cession at the end of the war. President Polk negotiated the Oregon Treaty with the British in 1848, and the Gadsden Purchase of 1853 from Mexico under President Zachary Taylor completed territory for a possible southern transcontinental railroad route. Over 3 months of October to December 1937, the U.S. Postal Department issued 4 3-cent stamps commemorating insular territories, Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. The U.S. Postal Department also used general issue stamps with the territorial name overprinted, such as Canal Zone.